Long before written history, before the first European ever set foot on the rugged lands of Montana, something ancient stirred. Archaeological traces whisper of human life here as far back as 7,000 years ago, a haunting echo of civilizations lost to time. As the centuries passed, powerful forces from the east began to shape the landscape. In the 1600s, drawn by the rhythm of migratory herds and the lure of untouched wilderness, the Plains Indians pushed westward. By the early 1800s, Montana was a vast mosaic of tribal nations, each holding dominion over its own sacred lands. The Crow ruled the south-central valleys, while the Cheyenne settled in the windswept southeastern plains. To the northeast, the Assiniboine and the Atsina, also known as the Gros Ventres of the prairie, held their ground. The powerful Blackfoot Confederacy dominated the central and north-central regions, fierce guardians of the Great Plains. In the northwest, the Kootenai hunted and traded along the mountain streams, while the Pend d'Oreille lived in quiet harmony around Flathead Lake. The Kalispel held the remote highlands to the west, and the Flathead called the Bitterroot and Clark Fork valleys their own. But the story grows darker. The southwestern corner, unclaimed, mysterious, became a land of quiet tension and contested borders. Then came the westward tide. As the United States pushed its frontier ever closer, it left a trail of broken treaties and displaced peoples. The Flathead were forced from their ancestral valleys, resettled under pressure into designated reservation lands in the Flathead Valley. The others soon followed. One by one, tribes were confined to reservations, each now echoing with memories of what once was. What mysteries still lie buried beneath Montana's soil? What forgotten stories still linger in the wind? The past is not gone. It is waiting, just beneath the surface. U.S. exploration and settlement. Montana's story took a new and fateful turn in 1803 when the vast wilderness became part of the Louisiana Purchase, a transaction that transferred millions of acres to the hands of a young, ambitious United States. But what lay within this uncharted frontier? To most Americans, it was a blank space on the map, untamed, unexplored, and veiled in mystery. That veil would begin to lift in 1804 when two men, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, led their legendary expedition into the unknown. Over the course of 2 harrowing years, the Lewis and Clark expedition became the first documented non-Native Americans to set foot in what we now call Montana. As they moved westward through rugged terrain and hostile weather, they recorded the land's breathtaking landscapes and encountered tribes who had lived there for thousands of years. But the explorers were only the beginning. In the wake of their discoveries came waves of opportunists, fur trappers, traders, and frontiersmen, drawn by rumors of rich resources and open land. They built rough outposts deep within the wild, bartering with native tribes for pelts and furs. Most of those early forts have long since vanished into dust and memory, except one. Fort Benton, founded in 1846, still stands today, a relic of an age when the Missouri River was a lifeline and a frontier port could mean the difference between fortune and ruin. In their shadow followed men of the cloth. Roman Catholic missionaries, answering a spiritual call, came not for trade or profit, but to spread faith. In 1841, they founded St. Mary's Mission near what is now Stevensville, believed to be Montana's first permanent non-native settlement. But isolation could not last. The land demanded access, and so the trails were cut, each with its own legend. The northern overland route reached from the east. The Bozeman Trail crept up from the southeast. And from Fort Benton, the last steamboat stop on the Missouri, the Mullen Road carved westward through perilous terrain. These were more than just paths, they were arteries of conquest and migration. And they brought with them change. Profound change. In the heart of Montana's wild beauty, the forces of exploration and expansion had been unleashed. The question now, what would be lost, and what would be discovered, in their wake? The rush for gold and the fight for survival. The winds of destiny shifted once again in the early 1860s, this time glittering with promise. News had spread like wildfire, rich placer gold deposits had been found in the untamed heart of Montana. From every corner of the country, gold prospectors surged in, desperate, hungry, and willing to risk everything for a chance at fortune buried deep beneath the soil. But gold rushes are never just about gold. They rewrite maps. They awaken governments. And they draw invisible lines across sacred land. Eager to claim this mineral-rich territory for the Union, the federal government acted swiftly. In 1864, it carved out the Montana Territory, naming Bannack, nestled along Grasshopper Creek, as its first capital. Soon after, the center of gravity shifted to Virginia City, where the rush at Alder Gulch turned raw wilderness into a booming frontier town overnight. Yet beneath the surface of this frenzied growth, a storm was brewing. As the number of U.S. settlers swelled and towns emerged from dust, Native American tribes saw their ancestral hunting grounds swallowed by greed and barbed wire. The land was changing, and they would not surrender it without a fight. Then came a clash that would echo through history. In June of 1876, under a scorched Montana sky, the Dakota, Sioux, and Cheyenne struck a thunderous blow against the advancing tide. At the Battle of the Little Bighorn, they obliterated the U.S. 7th Cavalry, led by General George Armstrong Custer. It was their last great victory. But resistance did not end there. In the Big Hole Basin, the following year, a band of Nez Perce, led by the brilliant and dignified Chief Joseph, defied the odds. They won a fierce battle against U.S. troops and began a desperate flight toward Canada, toward freedom. They came within mere miles of the border, only to be surrounded, outnumbered, and forced to surrender under the weight of exhaustion and betrayal. Their words still haunt the land. "I will fight no more forever," said Chief Joseph. But Montana remembers. Here, where mountains touch the sky and rivers remember every footprint, the past is never far away. The gold may have faded, but the legacy of courage, conflict, and loss endures. Statehood and the rise of empire. On November 8, 1889, Montana shed its territorial past and stepped onto the stage of the Union, now officially a state. Its capital was set in the windswept basin of Helena, a city born in the fever of gold, now transformed into the center of power. But the true story of Montana's ascent lay buried deep beneath its rocky soil. In the mining town of Butte, what began as a modest gold camp quickly spiraled into something far more explosive. By the 1880s, the rush for hard rock ore was underway. And then, copper. Vast, glittering veins of it, buried in the heart of the mountain, rich beyond measure. With that discovery, Butte earned a new name, the richest hill on earth. Fortunes were made and lost overnight. The town grew wild and unruly, pulsing with danger, dust, and money. But power breeds rivalry, and soon, Montana would become the battleground for a war unlike anything it had seen before. It would come to be known as the War of the Copper Kings, a brutal struggle for dominance between ruthless industrialists, each seeking to control the lifeblood of Montana's economy. When the smoke cleared, only one man stood unchallenged, Marcus Daly. Backed by nearly limitless capital, Daly built a mining empire with his mighty Anaconda Company. Smelters rose like iron temples, including the largest in the world at Anaconda, billowing smoke that darkened the sky and symbolized control. But Daly's ambitions stretched far beyond mines and metals. His company crushed mining unions, silenced dissent, and manipulated the state legislature like a puppet on a string. One by one, Montana's daily newspapers fell into Anaconda's grip. And for nearly 3/4 of a century, a single corporation pulled the levers of power across the state. Montana was rich, but at a price. What had begun with pickaxes and dreams had evolved into an empire built on control, secrecy, and silence. Behind the prosperity, there were whispers of exploitation, of corruption, of lives lost in shafts too deep to ever see the sun again. Even now, the legacy of the Copper Kings lingers, in the soil, in the air, and in the shadows of history. Boom, bust, and the battle for the plains. As the smoke of mining empires darkened the western skies, the eastern half of Montana, the wide, whispering Great Plains, was being shaped by a different kind of ambition. In the 1860s, longhorn cattle were driven north across vast distances, herded up from Texas to graze on what seemed to be an endless sea of grass. The land stretched unbroken to the horizon, untamed, fertile, and full of promise. At first, it was a cattleman's paradise. But nature would not be tamed so easily. The winter of 1886 to 1887 descended like a silent reaper. Bitter cold, relentless snow, and driving winds swept across the plains. The cattle, unprotected and exposed, perished by the tens of thousands. Bones littered the ground where herds once thundered. The open-range dream had frozen over. Yet the spirit of conquest endured. By 1900, a new wave arrived. Homesteaders, drawn by government promises and the hope of a new life. They came to bust the sod, raise grain, and forge futures from the dusty soil. Fields were carved out of the prairie with sweat and iron. At first, the land seemed to reward them. Bumper crops, high prices, and golden harvests. Towns sprang up. Schools were built. It felt like triumph. Then the sky betrayed them. A string of dry years scorched the fields. The rain stopped. The wind returned. Crops withered, wells ran dry, and one by one, families abandoned their farms, leaving behind ghost towns and broken dreams. But beneath the desolate fields, something else stirred. In 1915, the first wells tapped into petroleum and natural gas. By the 1950s, derricks dotted the plains. By the 1960s, production had surged to its peak, feeding a growing nation hungry for fuel. And still deeper, black veins of coal ran like secrets through the earth. Once burned in stoves and locomotives, coal mining surged again in the 1970s, driven by energy demand. But by the close of the 20th century, it had begun to fade, just another boom turned bust. Then came the 21st century. As global oil prices spiked, eyes turned once more to Montana's coal reserves. Talk of revival filled the air. Yet with it came questions about the cost, the land, and the legacy of chasing energy across fragile ground. From cattle to coal, the Great Plains of Montana have witnessed cycles of hope and ruin, fortune and failure. The landscape remembers everything, even when the people forget. The end of an era and the new Montana. By the early 1980s, a great silence settled over Montana's industrial heart. The copper veins had run dry, not of ore, but of opportunity. The mighty mines of Butte ceased their digging. The towering smelters of Anaconda went cold. The refinery at Great Falls shut down. It was the end of an era, the close of Montana's copper century. For over 100 years, the state had fed the engines of industry with its minerals, its mountains, and its people. But now, the machines had stopped. And in the stillness, Montana stood at a crossroads. The future could not be built the way the past had been. And so, the state began to change. No longer bound so tightly to the extractive industries that had once defined it, Montana turned to something quieter, but just as powerful. Its natural beauty, once seen as a backdrop, became its greatest asset. The towering peaks, untouched rivers, and endless skies began to call out, not to miners, but to travelers, dreamers, and retirees seeking refuge from the noise of modern life. In the 1990s, the wave arrived, newcomers from both coasts, drawn not by gold or copper, but by the promise of clarity, peace, and space. Montana became more than a state. It became a sanctuary. The 21st century brought more change, more carefully, more slowly. With a focus on sustainability and innovation, new businesses emerged that honored the land instead of conquering it. Tourism flourished, tech ventures found footholds, and the rugged individualism of the past evolved into a new kind of resilience, one built not just on survival but on stewardship. Today, Montana stands not as a forgotten frontier, but as a living archive. Every river, every ridge, every abandoned shaft tells a story. And some stories are only just beginning. If Montana's past stirred your curiosity, imagine what its future might hold. Subscribe to History Love for more journeys into the forgotten corners of time, the untold stories of nations, and the legacies that still shape our world. Like, share, and comment below, what part of Montana's story surprised you the most? Because history isn't just something we study, it's something we remember.